So the purpose of today's video is to give you the best chance possible of completely ridding yourself of gluteal muscle tightness forever. Now that can sound like a big statement, especially because there's a lot of people who promise a lot of things on the internet. But the way that I want to go about this is we're not only going to show you how to stretch that gluteal muscle tightness, but I want to try and help you figure out why those gluteal muscles have become tight in the first place. And the idea being is that if you are consistently trying to stretch those tight gluteal muscles, but you don't feel like you're ever getting rid of them permanently, then you may not be getting to the underlying cause of why they've become tight. So you get stuck in this perpetual loop of having to stretch them, but ultimately having to keep stretching them because the thing that's asked it to be there is still there, hidden behind the scenes without you realizing. So for me as a physiotherapist, I'm really passionate about trying to understand the root cause of why our aches and pains and general dysfunction exists. And what I've found clinically over the years is that there's two main reasons why your gluteal muscles are probably tight in the first place. The first is that your hip joints, the tissue underneath those gluteal muscles, have become tight or stiff. And the second is that your lower back might be dysfunctional. And what I find clinically is that if you have some segmental spinal dysfunction, whether that be stiff joints, tight tissue, overloaded tissue, poorly loaded tissue, in the areas that relate to the function of your gluteal muscles, where the nerves come from that supply those gluteal muscles, or the dermatomes that might refer dysfunction to those areas, then we need to give you some strategies that you can employ today to try and find and reduce that lower back dysfunction and any hip dysfunction that might be underpinning that gluteal tightness. And further to this, we also want to make sure that those gluteal muscles remain strong and functionally active so that your body isn't trying to replace relative weakness with restricted tissue to try and help support you in a similar way. So the first exercise we want to get to is one that we go through a lot on the channel, taking a ball and going hunting through those segmental areas of your lower back. It doesn't have to be tender, but it might be restricted. If there's any mechanical dysfunction there, it might be asking your gluteal muscles to be tight without you realizing. So all you need to do, as always, is take that ball or a foam roller. We're going to go hunting through the levels at the base of your rib cage, just at the top regions of your lower back. We can take the ball, place it in the middle of that area where the bumps are down the middle. We want you to let it roll off to the side a little bit. And then all I need you to do is just to lie down on top of the ball. You can do this up against a wall if you feel you need to. But all we want to do essentially is, with the bumps down the middle, we want to make sure that you roll the ball immediately off those bumps into the fleshy soft tissue part either side of the spine. So for me, I'm on the left-hand side closest to the camera. What I need you to do is take a very strong sense of which side feels the most stiff and restricted. So for example, I've got this on the left-hand side. I want to leave the ball here for 30 seconds or a minute just to get a sense of how tight or soft or hard this feels. And then if I move the ball across literally to the other side of that spine, I want to compare both sides to take note of which side feels the most restricted. For me, as always, it is this left-hand side or the side closest to the camera. And again, once you've found a spot that feels a little bit tight and restricted, again, it may or may not be tender. If it is, respect it, but we're looking for that stiffness and tightness. Let the ball press in or the foam roller press in for a minute or two. Prompt these tissues to mobilize and to release or free up. Once you've had enough of that, I want you to segmentally and subtly move the ball up a little bit or down a little bit, going hunting for any and all segmentally stiff or restricted areas from that point up and down. As I mentioned before, there's a lot of neural connections in between that part of your spine and your gluteal muscles. Whether it be the gluteal nerves that come directly from those segments of your spine, travel down and supply the function of those glutes, whether it's the dermatomes, those fetal connections that develop in the womb, which can potentially refer pain, but also can short circuit and inhibit the function of those gluteal muscles without you even realizing. And what's really interesting about this is before you do your gluteal muscle stretches or the strength exercises, which we'll get to towards the end of the video, and then do the same stretches again after you've done this exercise and see if it's magically loosened to some degree. Because on the channel, we want to make sure that we base everything on results. If this connection to your lower back or the deeper hip joint capsule seems foreign to you, or it's hard to make that connection about how this could be connected to your gluteal muscle tightness, don't trust me. Test yourself out, do the exercise, and then retest the same thing again. We need to make sure that you genuinely see a change in how tight those gluteal muscles feel, so that when you do your gluteal muscle stretches and strength exercises, you're coming from a better platform. But give that a go and let me know down in the comments how you found that went for you. So the second exercise we want to touch on involves getting to that deeper underlying hip joint capsular restriction. And again, my favorite exercise for this is just a hip capsular stretch. And all that requires is for you to hop onto your hands and knees, take the opposite leg back to the one that you're stretching. So I'm going to mobilize this hip joint. We want to rotate your foot underneath your back leg and drop that knee down to block that position. You can force it up further if you have that mobility, but we just want to come up as far as you feel comfortable. And the idea of the stretch and what makes this so beneficial is that keeping your shoulders and your hips together, we're just gently going to keep them together and shift towards the camera or shift over the side that you're trying to stretch. You might need to bring your hands across with you. It's really important that we make sure that we keep your shoulders and hips together. We don't want to see you dump down and disconnect between those shoulders and hips. Keep everything together, shift everything across together. And what we're looking to do is imagine that this thigh bone is gently pressing out the backside of that hip. It may not be a really intense stretch, but you might find some tightness in those muscles. But what this is doing is it's putting a hip external rotation bias into the hip joint capsule, hopefully getting to a part of the capsule that may become restricted from sitting down a lot for work or driving or sitting on the couch a fair bit. We want to go hunting around for that gentle pressure that you might feel at the back of that hip. And then we want to hang out here for 30 seconds or a minute to allow that hip to sink through the back. If you want to try and capture some of the muscular tightness over the top as well, when you're in this sort of comfortably relaxed position, you can gently squeeze and tense your glutes over the top. Hold that for 5 to 10 seconds. Again, what this does is that it creates a reflex that when you stop tensing it and relax, that tissue gives a little bit and you might find it suddenly a little bit looser than what it was before. But the main goal of this exercise is to spend some time facilitating that thigh bone, pushing out the back corner of that hip, biasing that hip joint capsule, and trying to increase the amount of range of motion at that hip and any signals that might ask those gluteal muscles over the top to remain tight. So once you've spent some time trying to address those potentially underlying causes of that gluteal tightness, we also need to make sure that you have a fast acting and effective strategy to reduce whatever muscular tightness is actually there. And for me, again, a really great way to stretch some of those tight gluteal muscles is with the pigeon stretch. Now, obviously you can do this stretch up onto a chair or a bench or a table, do whatever you feel you have best access to and whatever your current mobility allows you to do. But for me, considering that I'm on the floor, all we want to get you to do is you want to get your foot out to the side. We want to basically drop that leg down, create some of that hip external rotation. We want to go down as deep as you feel comfortable. And from here, once you've found some comfortable tightness in those gluteal muscles at the back of the hip, we need to make sure that you tense those muscles and squeeze those muscles. What I'm trying to promote a lot on the channel here is that static stretching, where you just hold a stretch for 30 seconds or a minute and hope for the best, it's nowhere near as effective, if it is at all effective, when compared to actively squeezing that tightness and making that tightness work. As we touched on briefly with the hip capsule stretch, by tensing that muscular tightness wherever you feel it, it creates a reflex in your brain that once you stop tensing that muscle, it gives it permission to relax, which means that you should automatically be able to drop down a little bit deeper than you could before. We then want to keep repeating that process, squeezing those gluteal muscles as hard as you can for 5 to 10 seconds. Relax, it'll give. You can then drop down a little bit deeper than what you could before. We want to keep doing this until you feel like you stop making change, because once you get down to this area, what we can also do is you can gently twist your trunk towards your knee. You can twist your trunk towards your foot, trying to hunt for which direction gives you the best access to those gluteal muscles and the tightness. You can try and poke your bottom back a little bit more before you press down, again, to emphasize that shape, but make sure that you squeeze that tightness, relax, it'll give. Keep doing that until you feel like you've captured as much of that muscular tightness as you can. And then once you've done that, you should automatically feel like there's less tightness in those gluteal muscles immediately. Because again, if you don't feel that experience, then you haven't made an impact on those symptoms. And then we want to add in some strength work just to top it all off. So when looking to strengthen those gluteal muscles, again, strength can really help decrease the need for muscles to become tight. Because if those muscles are strong and robust, then your brain doesn't necessarily need to ask for support from those muscles in the form of tightness. And while functional movements like squats and lunges and split squats and step ups are really important to make sure that you can use your hip musculature as a whole, because that's how it's intended to be used. When we're talking about a topic of specific gluteal muscle tightness, it's worthwhile doing some isolated specific gluteal muscle strengthening, just so that you can get a sense of where those muscles are and what it feels like to make them work in isolation, while you're also trying to make them work as a functional unit at the same time. And again, for me as a physio, a really simple way to do this is via some clam exercises. All you want to do is just to lie down on your side in a comfortable position. You can have a pillow or just your hands behind your neck if you need to. I want you to bend your knees up to about sort of somewhere close to 90 degrees, but not quite. Heels together. If you can find your hip bone at the side of your hip and come directly behind that, dig your fingers into that area, because this is where you should be feeling that muscular activity happen. Open up your top knee just to mirror a clam movement. You don't come up too high, because again, if you come up too high, your whole trunk and pelvis will roll backwards. It changes the line of force from acting behind your hip bone, which is where those muscles are, to the muscles at the front of those hip bones, towards that TFL, hip flexor area. It doesn't matter. All that matters is that you feel some fatigue fatigue through the muscles that act behind the line of that hip bone. Again, staying nice and still, only come up as high as you feel comfortable. We want to do a couple of sets of 10, a couple of sets of 15. We want you to experience that fatigue to tell your brain that it's not as good as it should be based on what you need it to do. If you want to make this harder, you can definitely grab a band of some sort, wrap it around your knees, increase the demands of this exercise. But again, chase that fatigue and watch those gains roll in. So then the final thing that I want to go through, just to tie all this in together, is that if you've been a fan of the channel for a while now, if you've seen some of the videos that I've put out, you'll appreciate the importance that I've come to put on the positions and the shapes that you put your tissue into day to day. The reason being is that we're trying to understand why specific parts of your body become dysfunctional. If you want to understand why whichever segments of your spine that were segmentally and specifically stiff have become specifically stiff, we could do a lot worse than chronicle the shapes and positions you get into the most throughout the day. So if you find that you sit at a desk, you sit at a couch, you sit in the car, you stand and bend over, and you feel like you unknowingly place a hinge or kick a hinge into some part of your spine and keep it there throughout the day, then that isolated hinge that you create is where the load goes. And over time, if your body recognizes an increase in load somewhere, it will try and adapt to that shape and potentially start to tighten and stiffen some of the tissues in those areas. It's one of the main reasons why we blame sitting a lot for stiff hips, because when we're sitting at that sort of 90-degree position all the time, we're not expressing that full range of motion in any direction through our hips, so it gets stiff to that position. So if we're not looking at the things that you put your body through day to day, in terms of the quality of the shapes and the quality of the positions, as well as how long you're actually there for, then again, if you're taking the time to stretch those gluteal muscles, get them stronger, but you're also taking the time to mobilize restricted lower back tissue and stiff hip tissue, then if you're still putting it in a bad position for long enough that it keeps prompting your brain to tighten those things up, then it's almost impossible to expect that this tissue is going to stay permanently loose and functioning normally forever. So as always, I genuinely hope that was helpful for you. Please let me know in the comments down below if it was. If you're someone who's been struggling with some gluteal dysfunction for a long time and you just haven't been able to find the solution to your problems, consider booking an online consultation with me. There's a link in the description if you'd like to go down that path. Please let me know in the comments down below how that resonated with you and which one of those exercises maybe gave you the best bang for your buck. I appreciate you tuning in, and I'll see you next time. Bye.